Hey, so I want to talk briefly about psychological safety in remote teams. Now, there's no way I can do this topic justice clearly in 5 minutes, 4 minutes. But there's a few little tips that I was chatting with someone about a couple of weeks ago, and I thought I ought to write them down and make one of these. So psychological safety is, a good definition I've come across is the freedom to speak up without fear of negative criticism or consequence. It's that feeling that you can speak up and say what you want and be open without fear of anything negative coming back on you. And it's one of the best studied social dynamics for really effective teams. Like, there's so much literature out there which says if you can create psychological safety within your teams and within your organization, you will get more effective teams and more effective people, and you'll also get happier people, right? Um, and it's way harder to develop psychological safety in distributed teams because it relies on genuine open relationships, or at least it's harder to develop in distributed teams when you don't do something intentional to develop it. And yeah, it's because it relies on people in the organization having genuine, honest, open relationships, and usually in the workplace where everyone's in the same office, those things get built through spontaneous conversations, through going for lunch, through, I don't know, playing football together after work, going for a pint, just having a natter about something, and just being around each other. Those spontaneous little snippets of conversation help to build these relationships, which then can eventually build into people feeling comfortable and feeling that they can speak up without fear of criticism. So to build psychological safety in remote teams, we need to deliberately engineer opportunities for spontaneous conversation. And the key word there is engineer. It has to be much more intentional with remote teams than it would if you've got people all in the same place. And I'll probably dig into this in some more videos in the future, because there's obviously way more to psychological safety than just this. One good example is making sure that people know what's expected of them. If people don't know what's expected of them by their managers or by their peers, and they're never going to feel psychologically safe, no matter how many spontaneous chats they have. But if we assume that your organization isn't horrible, and that people are nice and managers are generally good and people know what they're doing, switching to a remote team, or starting working with a remote team, we need to engineer opportunities for spontaneous conversation. And a few tips for that, I guess. Encourage random social one-to-ones. In a normal co-located workplace, people just kind of have a chat. In distributed workspaces, we kind of need to do that. We need to force those random hallway interactions. So I've had some success with basically encouraging random one-to-ones across the organization. In my last company, I made sure to speak to somebody who wasn't in my kind of reporting chain department bit, at least once a week, half an hour's chat once a week to someone random, just to see how they were doing. And that was purely social. There's tools like Donut, which is a Slack bot that pairs up two Slack users, and badgers them to meet up and have a chat. That can be kind of good, and definitely having a Slack channel where you post screenshots of those conversations is a good thing to do. I think allowing plenty of meetings as well, where it's cool to just spitball about work. So, there's a lot of conversations generally happen around a desk, again, that aren't necessarily social. They're related to work, but they're not necessarily related to the work at hand. So you couldn't write an agenda for them. And again, in remote settings, those conversations happen a little bit less. So if everyone in the organization uses Slack really well, some of that will happen on Slack. But definitely allowing meetings to not have an agenda and being really explicit, where you're like, okay, this meeting is just a team get together. It's a social, or it's it's cool to just get on a video call and chat about something random. And there's no agenda, no expected output. Just chat. I think encouraging that's really important. An open meeting room can help with that if you just have a Zoom call on. There's tools like Tandem, which are really good at that. You can have a water cooler room where folks can kind of come into and leave as they please, and have a random chat with people. That can help. Check-ins at the beginning of meetings can also help. I made a video about that a little bit ago. And using shared interest can help too. So I've seen I've seen a couple of companies use channels for music lovers, where there's a music channel and there's a shared Spotify playlist, where I don't know, everyone can contribute to that playlist, and everyone can then listen to that playlist as they're working, and then there's a channel in Slack to talk about it. And yeah, there's 100 more things like that. But the key thing is engineering opportunities for those spontaneous, weird little conversations that don't necessarily have an agenda behind them. They're just a conversation, and the more that can happen, the more likely you're going to get a feeling of psychological safety. I think it's also important to regularly remind people that not every conversation has to be work related. There are some organisations I know where there's this feeling that if you're not chatting about work, you're not working, and that's not only not true, it's also not conducive to building psychological safety. And I think with managers, it's worth noting, like, if you're a leader or a manager, one of your most important jobs is building genuine, honest relationships with people across the business. It's like a huge thing, a huge bit of your job, and you can't do that if you're rushing about like a mad thing, right? It'll likely take even more time to build those relationships when you're in a distributed team. But like, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, because having distributed teams have millions of advantages, right? So I guess if you're a leader or a manager, just remember that it's okay to give over time to having those one-to-ones, to spending some time on the music channel, or to or to having just a random chat with some folks, because it will help to build those relationships and spark those spontaneous conversations. So yeah, key point, I guess, psychological safety is the freedom to speak up without fear of negative criticism or consequences. And one of the ways we can help build that in distributed teams is by deliberately engineering opportunities for spontaneous conversation.